Tonight, a pivotal point for the war in Ukraine, now in its third year. How the nation's defensive lines are holding up.
They're called kitchen drones.
As officials take in training by Canadian soldiers.
The work they are doing here is literally saving lives.
Ceasefire negotiations in the Middle East inching forward as Israel's ground offensive looms.
We need a permanent ceasefire to be able to function.
What you need to know about Canada's online harms bill promising to protect kids. Plus, a Lego builder piecing it all together.
And I was one of only 2 Canadians to be chosen.
Canadian-made custom creations gaining international acclaim.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is vowing victory over Russia, even as Russian forces are gaining ground on the front lines, as this war is now in its third year. Overnight missiles and drones hit targets throughout the country, as they have for the last 731 days. The destruction and devastation evident from the beginning. But today, for the first time, the president announced the toll it's taking, with 31,000 troops killed so far. Ukraine's Minister of Defense says only half of all military aid is being delivered on schedule. Delays becoming increasingly problematic as the country struggles with manpower and dwindling supplies. But everyday Ukrainians are doing their part to contribute to the war effort. CTV's Heather Wright reports from Kyiv.
Hundreds of kilometers from the battlefield, a modern war is being fought here, at this windy farmer's field about an hour from Kyiv.
They're called kitchen drones.
Kitchen drones because they are being built at kitchen tables. Yulia Myronenko is helping to teach regular Ukrainians how to assemble drones that are sent to the front lines to bomb Russian positions.
So this drone, 10 inches, it can take a bigger bomb.
3-4 kilos. So we have to test it actually to see what is the best weight it can take.
She tests the drones here every week.
It was behaving very good, smooth, flying. So this drone is okay to go to the army.
Yulia is a writer and film director, or at least she was, before the war began. Her husband has been in the army for 2 years. This is her way of serving her country.
You have to take your life back and, take your power back and fight against this evil.
Today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky shared just how costly this fight has been. 31,000 Ukrainian troops have been killed since the invasion began, the first time a figure has been released. It's a number that will certainly rise as Zelensky warns of difficult months ahead, with a Russian offensive expected in May and no timeline for when U.S. aid may arrive. And so without a steady supply of ammunition, Ukraine is relying more and more on drones.
Really, drone changes war.
Oleksiy Babenko taught himself how to build a drone when the war began. His company now has 80 workers, building, soldering, and testing drones 6 days a week. They work in a nondescript building in central Kyiv. Their location kept a secret, with the Russians now targeting drone manufacturers.
We change the place a lot of time per year, so it's very hard to find where we are.
At about $400 each, drones are a cheap and effective way to hold off Russian troops. A fight every Ukrainian is now a part of, in one way or another.
We are fighting for our existence, first of all, because if we don't fight, we will not exist.
Ukraine now has a specific branch in its armed forces that manages drones. They are a key tool in its arsenal, but without heavy artillery and a steady flow of ammunition, many here fear Russia's advance will only speed up in the coming months. Heather.
CTV's Heather Wright reporting from Kyiv again tonight. That fear on the front lines is being relayed to countries including Canada, supplying heavy artillery and ammunition along with training. Today, 2 top ministers arrived in Poland and got a first-hand look at how Ukrainian forces are benefiting from military support, but also where Canada is falling short. Here's CTV's Judy Trin.
A simulated attack on Ukrainian troops. The difference between life and death rests on their ability to give medical aid and evacuate the injured. As part of Operation Unifier, Canadian Forces medics are training the Ukrainians in combat first aid, compressing an 18-month course into 30 days. Training only goes so far.
They're able to have the knowledge to save lives on the battlefield. When they leave here, they don't have the tools and the life-saving kit that they require to do that great work.
The Ukrainians don't have enough tourniquets, stretchers, or hypothermic blankets, so they're improvising.
Where they're even using doors, like house doors, to use as stretchers, for example. They also don't have the armored ambulances.
The Ukrainians are outnumbered and outgunned. Russia has more troops, more drones, more ammunition. To tip the scale, Ukraine needs more weapons, but its allies, including Canada, can't supply them fast enough.
Increasing production will take time, and so we've sought other sources.
The federal government has just announced $320 million in new military support for Ukraine. Canada will buy ammunition from the Czech Republic and donate it to Ukraine. More armored vehicles will also be delivered.
Brought up the armored ambulances here. We are manufacturing those in Canada. They're part of what will be delivering to Ukraine.
Canadian soldiers have been involved in Operation Unifier since 2015, after Russia annexed Crimea. Working alongside defense allies, Canada has helped train 40,000 Ukrainians.
And it's been a privilege to see the hard work and the amazing partnership with our Polish NATO allies.
Since Russia's full-scale invasion, Canada has provided Ukraine with more than $13 billion in loans and military support, but still spends proportionately less than other countries in the defense alliance. Tomorrow, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau could face uncomfortable questions when he meets with Poland's president and prime minister. Poland has already exceeded its NATO 2% GDP target. Canada isn't close and hasn't set a timeline for when it will reach that point. Heather.
Judy, thank you. A military offensive in Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah could be delayed if a deal is reached for a week-long ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. But as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made that statement, he also claimed that a total victory in the territory would also be near. Here's CTV's Jeremy Charon.
As smoke fills the night sky in Gaza, there is cautious optimism tonight towards a deal to pause the fighting.
It is still under negotiation in terms of hammering out the details of it. There will have to be indirect discussions by Qatar and Egypt with Hamas.
It said the framework for a weeks-long ceasefire and exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners has been laid out with the help of the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt. In Rafah, where cleanup is underway from Israel's intensified bombardment, there is hope. Enough is enough, this man says. Either the Israelis or us should stop. There should be a truce.
We need a permanent ceasefire to be able to function. We need the conditions to be able to exist for aid delivery.
Humanitarian groups say more than half of Gaza's population is seeking shelter here, where Israel is planning an expanded ground offensive, which could be delayed somewhat if a ceasefire deal is reached. They say this is a safe area, but there are daily shellings. There is no safe place, this man says. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, thousands of anti-government protesters were met with fierce pushback from police Saturday night. More than a dozen people were arrested. Water cannons were used to disperse the crowds, part of a weekly march calling for the release of hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza.
I'm here for my friend Eitan and his brother Yair, who've been kidnapped for over 141 days in Gaza.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says a ceasefire deal would only delay a military offensive in Rafah. He'll convene his cabinet this week to approve a plan, including the evacuation of civilians in the area. Heather?
Thanks, Jeremy. As global headlines focus on the war in Ukraine and Middle East, aid organizations say another devastating conflict is not getting the attention it needs. For nearly a year, a catastrophic war has raged on in Sudan. CTV's Kamal Karamali on the tragic outcomes and Canada's plans to introduce a new way for Sudanese to seek refuge.
Day by day, the situation in Sudan and the surrounding African nations grows more dire.
The rates of malnutrition are high. We are finding that the most impacted are the women and children.
The head of United Nations peacekeeping on the ground in South Sudan over the weekend as its Human Rights Office released a new report, highlighting some of the atrocities involving civilians since the war erupted last year. The UN interviewed over 300 witnesses and found several students may have been beheaded, troops parading with the decapitated heads in the street, and over 100 people subjected to sexual violence, rape, gang rape, and attempted rape, among them 19 children, some of which could amount to war crimes.
There are a litany of human rights abuses that the UN has identified.
In April, the Sudanese armed forces began warring against the Rapid Support Forces. The UN report shows more than 8 million people are now displaced, more than 27,000 injured, and an estimated 14,000 dead. But Tumi Ayul has lost touch with his family, worried they've been recruited.
They can force you to join the other side, on which side, so that you can survive within this conflict.
Now, Ottawa will open a humanitarian pathway, allowing the roughly 20,000 Sudanese here to apply for family to come to Canada.
So therefore, you have that number of people who are able to sponsor Sudanese. So we're not going to see, it's significant, but it's certainly not going to be the floodgates.
Meanwhile, the UN Human Rights Office demanding a full-scale investigation into some of these atrocities. Heather.
All right, Kamal, thank you. As the government looks to welcome those seeking asylum, there are calls for more to be done to address the housing crisis affecting people already here.
What's disgusting? There's a shelter right here, but there's no space for them. You need to open something up and get them indoors.
This mayoral candidate in Ontario says these unused trailers should be reopened to help the homeless. Located just meters from an encampment and a shelter, they are owned by the municipality. Just last week, a Kenyan asylum seeker died after waiting outside the shelter for 8 hours. A day after Donald Trump delivered Nikki Haley a crushing blow in her home state, the former South Carolina governor is tonight in Michigan, pledging to stick with her promise to remain in the running to become the Republican candidate. CTV's Tony Grace on what could be a turning point in the race.
Savoring a South Carolina win.
An even bigger win than we anticipated. And
Donald Trump convinced he'll be back on the ballot in November. Nikki Haley vowing to keep going at least until March 5th, Super Tuesday, by which time half of states will have made their primary choices.
I'm not giving up this fight when a majority of Americans disapprove of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Trump has swept the Republican presidential primaries so far.
Assuming nothing changes significantly, he will be the nominee of the Republican Party to be their presidential candidate.
The wild card to some observers, his criminal cases.
Donald Trump has to get through these criminal trials.
And whether Haley is positioning herself as a potential last-minute replacement.
I think what Nikki Haley is doing is attempting to showcase to the party that if, in fact, Donald Trump is not there by the convention, she's willing to step in.
She really needs to give her head a shake and think about the unity of the party.
The head of Republicans overseas Canada doesn't think it'll matter and expects Trump to be on the ticket.
The truth is the vast majority of Republicans will support him.
But what may matter, says this international relations expert, is Canada-U.S. relations under a second Trump presidency. Fewer old guard Republicans around him, harder lines on trade and border issues.
If he's reelected, it will be a new Trump presidency, and we all will have to try to adjust to it.
But tonight, the focus shifts right across the border to Michigan. That's where Nikki Haley is holding a rally this evening, and the state's primary is set for Tuesday. The next immediate test, Heather, on the road to November.
Tony Grace in Toronto. Coming up, in harm's way.
I felt like a failure as a parent.
The latest bill aiming to protect the most vulnerable. Plus, a Saskatchewan family's $5 million payday. Internet safety is a subject talked about in most households, especially with vulnerable family members, young kids or seniors. The Liberal government is hoping its long-promised online harms bill will help protect people. The latest version is set to be introduced tomorrow. CTV's Colton Prail reports.
More than a decade after Amanda Todd took her own life after online exploitation and bullying, her mother hopes new legislation will help protect children and spare families the grief she's had to endure.
I felt like a failure as a parent because I couldn't do anything. This is why something needs to be done and to make it easier.
The Liberals' long-awaited online harms bill will be introduced Monday, the latest in a series of sweeping and controversial internet regulations.
We need to make sure, and I think we can all agree, we need to protect our kids online.
The proposed bill is aimed at online companies and expected to target hate speech, terrorist content, child exploitation, and the sharing of non-consensual images, both real and AI-generated, all with a significant focus on child safety.
These are large companies, none of which are based in Canada, and we have to have some teeth to be able to compel action, or we'll just be ignored, basically.
The Conservatives say it's an attempt to censor Canadians, while others hope for even stronger digital protections than those expected in the bill.
It is a place where young people interact, and therefore it is our duty to design it in order to protect young people.
Protections some say should have existed long ago.
I don't have Amanda anymore, but I still worry for the kids out there and their families.
Legislation like this already exists in several other countries, like the UK, Australia, and the EU. Now, on their third attempt, the Liberals hope Canada will soon be among them. Heather.
All right, Colton, thank you. One of the world's most iconic landmarks has now reopened to the public almost a week after a strike forced its closure. Workers at the Eiffel Tower walked off the job as part of a dispute over how the tower was being managed and maintained. But the landmark's operator said it has now reached a deal with the workers' union. It comes as the city prepares to host the Olympic Games this summer. Still ahead, plowing through, the good neighbors cleaning up and digging out. Fans storming the court has become a beloved college basketball tradition, but it turned dangerous after the final buzzer. A huge commotion as Wake Forest fans stormed the basketball court celebrating an upset win. In the crush of it all, a 7-foot star player from Duke's team collided with a fan, calling it intentional. He injured his knee and had to be carried off.
How many times does a player have to get into something where they get punched or they get pushed or they get taunted?
After the incident, Duke demanded a ban on court storming. An update to a story we brought you last month. A case of hockey cards found in the attic of a family home in Saskatchewan has just sold for more than $5 million. The unopened boxes from 1979 are thought to contain around 24 Wayne Gretzky rookie cards, though no one is certain. Around 15 bidders had sought to buy the cards at auction, but in the end, they sold to a Canadian. Well, people in Newfoundland and Labrador are still dealing with cleanup after a messy week of weather, snow, rain, and freezing rain. It's a tough job for some, and that's where snow angels come in, willing to lend a helping hand or a shovel. CTV's Garrett Berry has that story.
You might say around here it's a job to keep up with it.
The snow was so heavy. Even though we had a couple of snow blowers, we still had to pack it down. And
walkways, driveways in need of constant care. Almost 75 centimeters of snow fell in this region in just a few days. The last time this much was on the ground, much of the province shut down in a storm that was nicknamed Snowmageddon. The snow's come back, and so have a few helpers.
I went back and tried to get the band back together, so to speak.
Rich formed a group 4 years ago after that massive storm, and now he's put it back together, responding to calls for shoveling help for people who need a hand.
Particularly disabled people, seniors, people who are ill, they just can't do it. And the cost of getting somebody to do it is quite prohibitive.
He's not the only one pitching in. Winter weather reveals a lot of need in these communities. Courtney Barber, who runs a Neighbors in Need Facebook group, sees posts every day looking for help with the physically demanding cleanup, winter clothing, or a bit of help with groceries when heating bills are the highest.
People, I think, really, put themselves in other people's shoes during the winter, and they understand, if you're disabled or if you're a senior, you're stuck in your home.
Newfoundland is getting older, and severe weather events getting more and more common. Rich says that might mean more helping hands are needed. Gary Perry, CTV News, Mount Pearl, Newfoundland and Labrador.
From shoveling to swimming indoors and an unexpected guest at a local pool. Video shows a deer bounding through the recreation center near Windsor, Ontario, before leaping over a barrier and into the water. It swims a lap as stunned locals watch on. The animal was eventually coaxed out of the building by staff. Authorities say the deer broke in through a window. After the break, throwing the instructions aside, the Lego artist creating some truly unusual creations. We leave you tonight with a Lego whiz crafting original art, taking inspiration from patterns in the world and online. A Lego builder who knows how to think outside the box. CTV's Mike Lamb pieces the story together for us.
Hi, my name is Zachary Steinman. I'm part owner of a bike shop here in Halifax, but on the side, as a hobby, it's actually become a little bit more of an obsession. I do Lego art. I first got into Lego in the late 70s, as many children do. I was into Space Lego, Castle Lego. Then I sold it all. Then during the pandemic, bought a set, tore it apart, built something else, and that's where it started. They are not kits at all. They're completely my own creations. They call them mocks, my own creations. Just stuff that comes into my head, in my hands. Last February, I got an email, supposedly from Lego, telling me that I have been chosen to exhibit my art in Denmark, the home of Lego. I thought it was a joke, but it turns out it wasn't a joke. They choose 15 people each year, and I was one of only 2 Canadians to be chosen. I didn't know that this opportunity existed, but it's like a dream come true. I never thought that would ever happen. It's been a roller coaster ride ever since. One of the biggest compliments I get is that they don't believe it's Lego. I was at some shows and people thought it was 3D printed objects, so sometimes I have to partially disassemble them to prove that it is Lego. I love the fact that there's rules to follow as far as the way Lego works, but it's just finding creative ways of doing that. So bending the rules. You can't do anything, but you can almost do anything with Lego.
That is some true creativity. That is our show for this Sunday evening. I'm Heather Butts. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Omar and Sandy are back tomorrow, and I'll see you again on Friday. Good night.